Welcome to the Early Education Conversation, where we discuss the transformative power of early learning with thought leaders, educators, and community members.
Welcome back to the Early Education Conversation. I'm Aruna Gilbert, and today I'm thinking about the work we're doing in Palm Beach. For 2 decades, the work has been to move children toward kindergarten readiness, and the deeper I've gone, the clearer one thing has become. It's the relationship between a child and the adult caring for them that is foundational to moving learning. My guest today has spent his career taking that idea rather seriously. Dr. Robert Pianta is the Batten Bicentennial Professor Emeritus in Early Childhood Education and Dean Emeritus of the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia, where he's also the founding director of the Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning. Also important to the conversation we'll be having today is Dr. Pianta is also the mind behind the classroom assessment scoring system known as the CLASS tool, which gives us a real way to see the coach and the quality of teacher-child interactions, the observable, the moment-to-moment exchanges that over time become the relationships I care so deeply about. Dr. Pianta, welcome to Early Education Conversations.
Thanks, Aruna. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm a little nervous because I've read so many things about you and we've done so much work around the stuff that you have almost spent your life doing that it's so wonderful to have you today.
Well, thanks. I will say, just to preface a little bit, it's just such a pleasure to be able to engage with people that have taken on this work and own these ideas and taken them into the field. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to have this opportunity.
Thank you. So I'll start with a question I ask everybody. What does early learning mean to you? The thing that keeps you returning to after all of these years?
Oh boy. Um, for me, it means that young children have the opportunities to engage deeply and authentically with environments that are stimulating and relevant and interesting to them. And I kind of feel like when that happens, that's kind of the magic secret sauce, because that's where they grow cognitively, they grow social emotionally. It's like that's where flourishing, I think real flourishing takes place for young children. So that's what it
Yeah,
means to me. And I think if we do that and we give kids those kind of opportunities, they're set up very well for success.
absolutely. So I come from this whole, relationship and all of this stuff from kind of like a system side. And you come to this from the attachment and relationship tradition. And your later signature work on class turned towards the observable interaction. How how do you think you understand that arc in your own thinking? And what was it that, in my opinion, moved you away from relationships or a way of getting at the same thing more, relationships to interactions? Was it, do you think it was getting at the same thing but in a different way?
Totally. So just, I had these experiences first as a teacher where I was a special education teacher and I had the chance to work with, this is in middle school, the chance to work with a same group of kids for 3 years in a row. And what I watched unfold over that time was, and I experienced quite personally, was that we kind of got to know each other after the end of the first year, and then I didn't pass them along to somebody else. They came back to me, the second year, and we kind of picked up where we were. And over time, there was a very powerful sense that, hey, there's we have a way of co-regulating one another that enables us to get work done in a way that that didn't seem possible when everything was a transaction over behavior management or learning. There was a bigger thing in play, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I went to graduate school and was deeply immersed at Minnesota in studies of mother-child attachment, and then I found I found a lens and a language and a theory that explained my experience. And so, and I had a motivation to try to do something practical in my career. And in a sense, I realized like I had no systematic training or support for the relational experiences I was having as a teacher. And this framework that I was learning may have relevance for that. And so the starting point, to your point, was relationships. And I thought about relationships or wrote about relationships very much from a systems perspective. That these relationships are, composed of lots of components. Characteristics of the individuals and their behaviors and the way they give feedback to one another, all those sort of things, and that those kind of fit together in a way that the system itself carried, itself forward. That relationships are really patterns of behavior and thinking and beliefs that serve kind of a regulatory purpose particularly in child development. And so in thinking about the practical part of this, which was like, um, how do we kind of get traction on the idea that these things can be changed and measured? Because that's what I was really trying to get after on the practical side. Interactions to me seemed the way to go, in part because they're observable, they're public, they are actionable. They are the thing that's actionable by teachers. I think oftentimes in many approaches to teacher learning and professional development, we rely very heavily um, on working on teachers' beliefs or their knowledge, but we don't give them a lot of tools around their behavior. So interactions, you could think of interactions as a component of relationship systems, and they're kind of a lever that if you can get some change going in the behavior between two people, then you'll see the rest of the system reorganize itself around behavior so that a teacher who learns to become an effective helper through her behavior to
Mhm.
kids, the kid all of a sudden experiences that teacher as a consistent helper, and that shifts the way they look at each other. A lot of this was based on work that's been done with parent-child relationships for sure. Yeah.
So, would I be accurate in saying that interactions is kind of like the observable raw material and relationships is what accumulates over time?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, when you designed class, what was the use you had in mind, and how far is that from how it actually travels in the world now?
Yeah, good. That's a very good question. Um, so uh, I think there are multiple starting points for class. Uh, and just to share a couple of them. I think first, as I said before, as a teacher in training, there was just no language or lens for this, and I thought as a developmental scientist and theorist, I thought this is one of the most important influences in child development. The relationship between an adult and a child, a young child. And we as a profession in early education um, emphasize how important that relationship is, and yet we have no tools through which to exercise some degree of influence on that relationship for the good. Uh, and so consequently, I felt like most of what would happen, even though all of this happened with good intent, that people would engage around discussions of relationships and things like that would go nowhere because we didn't kind of have a language and a lens that allowed us to have anchored discussions and anchored initiatives around um, description and improvement. So for me, the class was the tool that was like the base. It was like we have to be able to describe what we're talking about. We have to be able to make distinctions between how it shows up when we think it's effective and good, and how it shows up when it's not so effective and not so good. And if we can get that right, and then demonstrate that that variation between what looks positive for kids and what doesn't look positive for kids in terms of interactions, if that's actually connected to their learning
Mhm.
and a valid indicator of a resource for kids, then we have a real license to go ahead and like, let's go ahead and build tools that improve this resource for kids. Um, so it was really an attempt to try to this this is sometimes not such a great word, but it was an attempt to try to organize and standardize an area of educational opportunity and experience that everybody thought was valuable, but we really didn't have a set of tools to be able to act on it. And so we had done some research early on using a prototype version of the class. And if you observe in classrooms, we observed this was part of the NICHD study of early childcare study. If you observed in classrooms where kids were kindergarten, first, third, and fifth grade, and you asked whether the quality of interactions that kids were having in those classrooms were, top third, middle third, bottom third, and you say, how does that, then let's look longitudinally for individual kids' experiences to see how that kids experience that year in and year out. And
Mhm.
basically, what we learned from that is about 10% of kids have an experience in a classroom with a teacher of the teacher's interactions that would be characterized as the top third or middle third throughout those grade levels. And so what looked to us was this was a pattern of luck, that you were just lucky to get a teacher who was able to and skilled at effective interactions with kids in their classrooms. And so what we're trying to do is move from luck to guarantee, and these
Yeah.
tools were ways of doing that. Um, I will say that the class also came out right at the time that Head Start was being reauthorized. And this was the Bush years, Bush 2. And it was great that they were paying attention to early education. And I thought that I do believe very strongly in accountability, that these are public investments that we should make sure are effective. I had
Mhm.
spent a lot of time in classrooms watching, for all sorts of reasons, a lot of ineffective interactions and lots of opportunities that weren't being realized, and lots of opportunities that were being realized, and very little systematic effort around those. So I was very interested in the way that class could be used as an improvement tool. Uh, and I thought it could become like a target for professional development. And uh, the reauthorization of Head Start uh, basically was initially oriented toward testing kids. You may remember this, the national reporting system. Um,
Yeah.
and, that didn't go so far. And so they, essentially they turned to testing classrooms, around interactions. And we had published some papers that showed how class interactions were, more predictive of kids' outcomes. And so, there was an interest in using it as a tool in an accountability system. I had very mixed feelings at the time. I still have mixed feelings. I think it kind of was done in a way. Here's an interesting kind of contrast. Um, that tool was initially used in the Head Start system in a sanction-based accountability system, right? So that it was used as a marker. If you didn't meet the bar, you failed, and then you had to go through um, and uh, and so consequently, I think it was hard for a lot of people to adopt it as a kind of focus for their practice. Rightly so. I think people saw it as professionals saw it as a kind of act of punishment, an extension of a punitive, approach.
An
But
odd way of looking at relationships and
totally,
interactions.
totally. Yeah, it's like distorts it. But fast forward 10 years, and class is adopted in Louisiana statewide to as the sole marker in their quality rating and improvement system. The only thing they're going to care about in the quality ratings improvement system. And they go through great lengths to train observers, and some of them professionals, some non-paraprofessionals. And what they do very clearly is set it up in improvement-based accountability system, which is, you will get measured, you'll get observed, and that you will get feedback around that observation in a way that is tied to a set of professional development opportunities for you. You'll
Mhm.
get incentives, tax credit incentives, if you spend your professional development money on um, PD that's aligned to interactions. And the whole wheel, kind of fit together. The hub and spokes of an accountability system fit together. And you saw, a widespread adoption, none of the kind of challenges that this faced in the Head Start approach. And over the course of 3 or 4 years, quality improved for kids, statewide. So I think there were two contrasting use cases there at a very large level of scale that kind of um, validated my version, my sense that this should be a focus of improvement and a target for improvement. And if so, it can be used at a much larger level of scale than we
Mhm.
typically have done.
Mm. You're thinking when you're talking about the accountability and, all of the consequences and whatnot attached, whether you put a consequence attached or you put it as, just a rating of getting better,
Mhm.
consistently getting better. Do you think a coaching tool change, like the nature of a coaching tool changes when you hang stakes on it?
Um, yeah, I think I think you can't avoid stakes. Like there are stakes even when we say there aren't stakes, I think sometimes because I think but I think there are different forms of stakes, and I think what I think is most important, and particularly, I'm really glad you brought up coaching because this is super important resource for our field. And I've seen most of the success, and we've developed tools around coaching and coaching models. We call my teaching partner. A lot of other people use coaching. And the use of a standardized tool, a validated tool that gives the coach and the teacher visibility into practice in a way that they can have very detailed conversations about that teacher's practice is enormously powerful as a change agent. Um, and so, uh, again, I believe there's a form of accountability in everything we do, and we
Mhm.
should as professionals be accountable to ourselves and the kids that we serve by adopting tools that have kind of a track record of success and embed those in systems that lead to people's improvement with a much more you know uh, dedicated focus
Yeah,
on.
certainly in Palm Beach County, we started class years and years before the state did as a
Right.
coaching tool. And so before they adopted it as that accountability measure, we had started it as a coaching tool and loved it as such.
Mhm.
So when you're thinking about it, is there anything about how the field took up class that surprises you, or maybe that you'd reframe if you were introducing it today?
Um, well, I would lean much more heavily on the use as in improvement systems, and today obviously we have this experience with it that you could draw on to draw these contrasts like I just did with Head Start in Louisiana, or such as you're talking about, in Florida and in Palm Beach. Um, there are a lot of trade-offs. Our programs serve thousands and thousands of teachers and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids. And we want all those kids and teachers to be able to be effective. So there's kind of a trade-off between doing something at a large level of scale and doing it with responsibility and fidelity, which to me again gets into this question of accountability, and
Mhm.
then and then kind of doing it in ways that kind of allow it um to be kind of more organically adopted and used, maybe with a little less, you know, oversight, but with some way of gauging its consistency with the ways that these tools were developed and brought forward. And so, I think we can lay accountability on kind of a continuum there. I feel like something in the middle that says we are trying to serve all these kids in the same in a consistent manner, so that everybody does really have an equal opportunity, or as close as we can get to that. Um, and to give programs such as Palm Beach, or programs such as we have worked with folks in Dallas for a long time, many places around the country, where they can own it, adopt it, and use it in the context that is most salient, in the way that's most salient and relevant for them. So there's just this kind of trade-off between um, kind of adopting something and localizing it, and adhering to a set of principles and fidelity, so that you're carrying the core ideas and value of that into that context.
Yeah, I think when I'm thinking about how class is adopted in Florida and how we're looking at it, it's kind of two-pronged and to me a little odd, right? Because
Mhm.
one, we're looking at class as sort of the mechanism to help teachers skill build and really move forward. But on the other hand, we're also looking at it and saying, well, if the teacher skill builds and move forward and you have a good class score, then the child will be ready for school. And so my question to you is, does class directly impact a child's readiness, or is it the foundation of the relationship that impacts the possibility of readiness?
Uh, well, I think class, we have good evidence on this, I think, in many hundred studies. It's not the only thing that
Mhm.
influences kids' readiness, as we all know. But it captures elements of educational and developmental resources that are present in classrooms, embedded in moment-to-moment interactions between teachers and children in those classrooms, that contribute directly to students' readiness. Okay. Those
Mhm.
interactions are part, as we talked about, a bigger relationship system. So
Mhm.
we were talking about coaching a minute ago. And, as I suspect most experienced coaches would admit, um, you could be working with somebody about sensitivity in their interactions with kids by looking at kind of a 15-second snippet of videotape, and very quickly move from a conversation around the behavior that's in that videotape to something much broader and revealing and reflective about the teacher's beliefs about kids. So when they say things like, wow, I never knew that a child would respond to me that way if I behaved this way. Then all of a sudden they're moving from interaction into relationship. They're kind of expressing the relationship in the context of that statement. So, yeah, so I think by focusing on interactions, we're squarely in the space of relationships still. Um, and I think that class really can be a tool that helps stimulate those kind of activities and foster them in the ways that you're describing its use there. Um, it we have to be careful, and I think this is one of the downstream downsides of the way it kind of gets used in some large scale implementations, where a teacher just gets a number. It's like, well, and that number is not relevant, or a number and some brief written feedback. So there needs to be some discourse and some context and some richness to a teacher's understanding
Mhm.
of interactions, and how this number translates into what the value of a relationship for them and for the student.
Yeah, I definitely think I think that's the piece that we've got to get a little
Yeah,
better. right?
Yeah, agree
It's
completely.
putting those two things together.
I
So I
agree
have to
completely.
ask, as we're moving into the world of AI, as it arrives in this space faster than I think anyone has a framework for, is there a risk it gets very good at scoring interactions while the relationship, which I think is what actually moves learning, stays invisible?
Um, yeah, I mean that as we just said, that risk exists now, when somebody just gets a score, right? Like even if it's a human who's scoring the interaction. I think the value the risk that you identify is very real. And I think again, that risk is tied to a way in which we very often gather data in educational context, whether it's about the teacher, whether it's about the interaction, or whether it's about a kid's early math score, where the number, stands in for a very complex and rich process that is not well described by that number. Um, and you're right that AI potentially extends that risk to even more people or more often or what, whatever the case may be. Um, I am hopeful and I have actually seen so one of the things that the comments we get about scoring and um, about coaching and about feedback and about the resources that support good coaching is that it's kind of sometimes it's clunky, it takes a lot of time. We need a lot of people. You got to train a lot of people. That ends up getting expensive, and people are doing things with a measure that they could be doing. They could be spending that time with kids or with other teachers. So how do you make all of that more efficient and smooth and create a stronger set of scaffolding tools that enable more effective interactions and relationships to be taking place in more classrooms for more people and for more kids. And I think AI offers us the potential for that. And while we explore that potential, we've got to mitigate the risk. I think you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So do you think that's the next frontier of
Yeah, I
measurement?
think I think this is, there's a lot of this work going on around the country, around the world. And my sense is that I talked about this kind of mission. This is honestly kind of a personal mission that we move from luck to guarantee, that it's not
Mhm.
a matter of luck that a kid gets a teacher who displays these kind of features. So the more we can use whatever tools and information we have available to us to provide resources to real human interactions that enable those human interactions to do the things that, in relationships to do the things that they do for the adults and the kids in classrooms, then I think the better off will be. And I see AI and technology as a tool in our toolbox to be able to do
When you talk about, we've got to move from luck to guaranteed, right? One of the things that's coming up for me is, we have a workforce that's stretched,
it.
undersupported, and how do you think what would be probably the most responsible measurement to even look at the workforce and the way the workforce is kind of
Yeah,
interacting with children?
yeah,
Connect
um,
back for me that relationship and outcomes part.
yeah. I'm really like I think it's so important that in some sense we're finally at this point. It's like if we go back to the George Bush years, which the national reporting system, we're talking about kids' test scores. Finally, we're now talking about the workforce, and as the real resource for kids. And I think we're at a point where there's great opportunity to be really creative in how workforce capabilities are developed and kind of measured in ways that return meaningful benefits to kids and return meaningful benefits to the adults who are serving kids. And I think for too long, I've been a critic of this. I think for too long, we've required teachers, sort of the certification regime has required an awful lot of activity, time, and money out of adults that haven't translated into benefits for them or for kids. Sometimes to them because that's the compensation path that, when you go get more degrees or get more training. So I have felt that that there are ways in which we can embed in teacher preparation and in the certification systems measures such as class, which would allow someone to be um, I'm going to use the word certification, but I don't really mean certification, but it means I have evidence of my capability in interacting with kids in these kind of contexts that are of value to the kids and are of value to hiring agents and programs, and so beginning to figure out how people, I mean, that's kind of the badge competency-based way of thinking about workforce development that I think has a lot of promise. And I'd like to see the um, workforce development shift a little bit further in that direction so that people are developing competencies that may help them be and feel more effective, in the path that they're choosing, and have real value for the kids that they're serving.
Yeah, and I'm listening to the competency, and that's the thing that worries me as well, is that, that's focused on the badging and the competencies
Yeah,
and the,
yeah.
you know, and I worry that what we're doing is measuring the interaction, right? Because it's something that's,
Hmm.
observable. But at the same time, we're ignoring sort of the conditions of the person responsible for bringing it forward. So my question would be
Yeah.
is is well-being a precondition for relational quality? And
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up well-being because there's there's no way in which we can be thinking about relationships between teachers and students as a resource, as an asset to children and to the teacher without thinking about the well-being of the adult. There's just simply no way to do that. Now,
Mhm.
I tend to think that feeling effective in your interactions with kids is actually one part of well-being for a teacher. But it's not by any stretch the whole thing. And so I think I've many colleagues who are working on this as well. Attention to working conditions, giving teachers. I mean, we brought up coaching earlier. I think one great um, uh, element of coaching is the relationship between the coach and the teacher. Where that becomes a safe space to talk about practice and a safe space to talk about the conditions under which the teacher has to practice. And so I think attending to those issues is going to be very important. I believe compensation is a really important part of all this as well. Not just the kind of social emotional side of well-being or psychological side, but there should be, much more attention to elevating compensation, and again, tying it again, not just elevating it, but tying it not to you have to go off and get a degree, but like that, maybe that's a good thing to do. That's a fine thing to do, but we should be giving our workforce, I believe, options and alternative pathways that fit their particular profile of needs and resources and conditions in which they live and work that help lead to their improvement in the classroom.
Yeah, I really love that framing of where systems really should be putting their attention and their dollars, right? It's in the people who are going to give you the
Oh,
variables you want upstream. And so I really I like
yeah.
that. So let me pivot a little bit. For someone like me, accountable for readiness across hundreds of sites, what's the one thing you'd most want us to carry forward?
Well, I think it follows exactly the one thing to carry forward is precisely this. this focus that we're kind of exchanging around now, which is it is the human element of what's offered to kids and what's experienced by kids and by teachers in the settings that you're operating in. That
Mhm.
is the most important element of the readiness of those kids ultimately for school, um, which is kind of, I guess, why, I think we build these programs in part because of that, but not totally. Um, and that are the sticky parts of experiences in these programs, both for teachers and for kids that carry forward for them. That
Yeah.
it's relationships and interactions and those human experiences that ultimately not just lead to better attention in the classroom, better language scores, but also lead to a sense of, of security, well-being, and kind of identity, really, for
Mhm.
kids as they move forward and for teachers as they're doing their work.
Mhm. Dr. Pianta, I find myself sometimes in spaces in that policy and system level rooms, right? And, relational is something touchy-feely, not empirical. And
Yeah,
so when you're in these spaces, what do you think lands and what do you think gets lost in translation when you're talking about relational,
yeah.
view in policy?
Well, we go back to the beginning of our conversation, which is one of the reasons why. Another reason why I created the class, I thought that it was that this this relational, language and these constructs can very easily get lost in translation. People say one thing to one person, and unless they're anchored in a common denominator, then it gets missed in translation, or it gets pushed to the side as, oh, that's the soft stuff. That doesn't really matter. And I think we've learned one thing is that it's not the soft stuff. We have lots of evidence that shows how important relationships are for kids. And we now have evidence, I think our work has done a lot of this with class, but others as well, that you can measure this, that it's not just something that's floating around in the air, but it's something that can be anchored in a set of standard descriptors that can get applied across many, many different kind of contexts. So that's the way I go into the meetings with policymakers. I kind of say, you regulate the building of bridges on the basis of the size of, the bolts, and inspecting whether the bolts are bolted together in the way they're supposed to be. And we now have tools. Again, I don't necessarily mean class is the only one, but we now have tools that enable us to do the exact same thing about these resources and opportunities that are so important, and that you're investing lots of public dollars in to provide support for kids learning.
Yeah, I've heard this question before, and I wondered how you would answer it. This question was posed to me once about how can relationship quality, so to speak, be built at scale of a state system,
Yeah,
and then uh, like does something essential erode when we standardize it?
yeah, yeah. And uh, I guess my point is consistently, we probably lose a little something when we standardize it, but what do we gain when, like, for example, I think we have these use cases. I mentioned Louisiana. What happened, what we have when I'm able to show kind of a heat map of the state of Louisiana with over the course of 4 years, with the quality of interactions going up over that period of time. Yeah, we probably have lost a little bit of something because we've kind of reduced a very important um, thing like a relationship to behaviors that are just in the classroom. But we've also increased the kind of carrying capacity of the entire system for supporting kids' development through more positive interactions with teachers. So, again, there's no way I mean, you know this very well as an administrator. Every administrator knows this. Um, there's no way there isn't a trade-off. So any move we make in
Mhm.
trying to improve systems. Um, And I think you're right to identify it. And at the same time, for me, these trade-offs or the potential risks don't yet, I don't see any evidence that they undermine the importance and the value of moving ahead to try to implement these tools in the best way we can.
So as we're coming to our close, we have thousands of teachers who don't know you by name, but know you by class. And lots of them using it and lots of them building their skills and increasing every year, even if it's small,
Yeah.
tiny percentages, they continue to increase. So for our teachers who I know will be listening to this, what is something you can say to them or an idea that they can take into their classroom tomorrow morning? What kinds of stuff would that be?
Yeah, that's a phenomenally important and good question. People have asked me a lot of times, like, what's the secret sauce, in all of this? And honestly, for me, and this is based both on my own observations and experiences as well as evidence that we have, is uh, first off, as we've said, most important asset for that child in that classroom is you and your behavior toward that kid. And the critical element of your behavior being as valuable to that student as it possibly can be is your ability to see your behavior with a student from the perspective of that student on that behavior. So it's really like stepping into the student's shoes um, and watching you as a teacher and feeling you as a teacher behave toward them. And practicing that aspect of teaching and that aspect of engaging kids is just so extraordinarily important. That's what the best effective teachers do. That's what people learn with experience, I think, a lot of times. And it's for me, it's the key to all of this.
What a lovely thought. I mean, I really like that. I like that. It seems so simple and doable and something I think that we haven't anchored a lot in kind of articulating to a teacher. And I really like that framing.
Thanks. Yeah. When we do a coaching, this is why we kind of boil it down to looking at 15-second clips. And the
Mm.
question as we're coaching is, what is this teacher doing to create opportunities for this child to learn? And how is it? It's not, we talk about interactions, and I've make this mistake too often, as if it's just the teacher's behavior. But it's not just the teacher's behavior. An interaction is the teacher's behavior and the student's response to it, and then the teacher's response to the student. And it's a loop. And paying attention to that loop and calling attention to what do you think that child's trying to do in that moment? What do you think that, and calling attention to the child's perspective
Mhm.
is really, for us been the thing about coaching that's for me been an aha moment about the value of coaching.
Yeah. Well, speaking of loop, you and I could probably spend the rest of our lives on this screen talking about all the things because this has been an incredible conversation. I am so grateful, Dr. Pianta, for all the things you've given me this morning. And I think all the things you're going to give to our listeners when they hear this, such a clear way to hold the difference between what we can see in a classroom and what's actually moving a child. And I am very appreciative of your time.
Well, thank you. This has been so enjoyable for me, Aruna, and I'm equally grateful, if not more grateful, for the opportunity to be able to talk about these ideas with you.
Thank you so much. And for my audience, if today's conversation stayed with you, Dr. Pianta's work and the research behind class lives at the Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning at UVA. And for the deeper dive as a field reference, because this is the thing, this is the Bible that I've used, is the Handbook of Early Childhood Education. It's a real map of the field for anyone building systems. To everyone listening, this is the heart of what we do at Early Education Conversations, bringing research into honest dialogue with the work of building systems. Until next time.